again, I'm just going to put up on the screen the HIMARS system because this is one of the very, very advanced weaponry that has been, passed on to the Ukrainians. The M142, and Scott, as you mentioned, the United States, the deal was that, okay, we give you the weapon system, but we still, we're still in charge of targeting. Is that correct?
Well, again, this is what the deputy head of intelligence for the Ukrainian military in the Kiev district had said, that is the case. So prior to this, I would have said that would be my informed speculation. But right now, we can say that is what the Ukrainians are saying. That HIMARS is a strategic asset. And here's the important thing, too. To use HIMARS isn't just about firing on the target. The Russians are actively looking for this system, which means they have drones up. They have electronic warfare capabilities deployed, listening in for radio traffic. They have satellites up taking pictures, looking for patterns of behavior that are repeatable. And so the United States intelligence right now is doing the kind of support that we would provide to American assets that were being hunted down. We're looking at what the coverage is. Are there any seams in it? Are there any gaps, both in terms of physical gaps that can be exploited by movement and timetables where systems might be down at a given time. And you find a window of opportunity that gives you the ability to move an asset in, fire the asset, and then get the asset out without being detected and destroyed. This happens on every strike because the Russians are actively looking for it. So the United States is involved with every aspect of the HIMARS employment because the United States doesn't want the Russians to succeed in destroying all of these. I mean, the Russians have already apparently, knocked out anywhere from 4 to 6 of these, maybe more. And that's with this kind of support. But the United States is heavily involved in preserving HIMARS strike capability. So it's not just about coordinating the targeting; it's about coordinating every aspect of the operation to increase survivability of the system.
Yeah, and my memory fails me right now. What was the other one that they gave them? They gave them the HIMARS and the
M777.
There you go. I mean, what were your thoughts when they handed over all this sophisticated weaponry? Because it's one thing to pass on a couple of stingers, but now with this,
well, with the M777, I wrote an article, and everybody poo-pooed the article when I wrote it. I said it's a good artillery system, but it has some fundamental flaws. And I pointed out that when the M777 deploys, for instance, to the National Training Center, NTC, at Fort Irwin, California, to do the live fire, large scale maneuvering, if it's not maintained on a regular basis, pulled off of the firing line and basic primary maintenance done, you could lose 40, 60, 80% of your operational capability after the end of a 4-week training cycle because the system's just going to break. Instead of to make it lightweight, they used a lot of titanium. The titanium is lightweight, but it also cracks, especially when subjected to repeated stresses of high rates of fire. And so what we now know is that the M777 is just breaking down across the board, and the Ukrainians can't use it. It's being pulled out of the line. Many of them are being sent out of country to be maintained because the Ukrainians don't have the spare parts, don't have the training, don't have the ability to fix these things. So the M777 went in there. It was supposed to be a game changer. When it was used, it did give the Ukrainians the ability to put down lethal fires at a longer range with higher accuracy. But the system is breaking down as I said it would. And right now it's the majority of the systems that we provided, I think we provided 108 of them. The majority of them are either destroyed or pulled out of service. And the ones that they're using aren't going to work much longer because the thing about combat is it's tough on equipment. And when equipment breaks, look at the same thing with the German The Germans provided them with their most advanced self-propelled artillery piece. They're all broken. Went in there, Ukrainians fired them a couple times and went, oh, it's not working anymore.
So they gave them all the old crap, basically.
Well, even if they give them new crap, it's crap. The point is, the Germans, when the Germans produce a piece of equipment, they have, their military industrial complex work together with the Ministry of Defense to produce something which the Ministry of Defense was prepared to support in terms of training and in terms of maintenance. And so you build into your operations, first level maintenance, second level maintenance, third level maintenance, fourth level maintenance, and it's all programmed in, and you have people trained at each level to do what is necessary. And they're Germans, which means these are guys who are used to dealing with Porsche, with Mercedes-Benz, vehicles of that nature. And then you turn them over to Ukrainians who are used to dealing with Ladas and Fiats. I'm being facetious here, but they're not.
They're trained on Russian equipment, and it's quite the transition.
And this stuff just breaks, and so all of it's being sent back to Germany right now because it's all broken. So it's not just American equipment that breaks; everything breaks. And that's the problem with trying to introduce at a time of war new equipment that requires a fundamental restructuring of the entire way that you sustain a war. There's a saying that wars are won by logistics.
Yes.
And Ukrainians
My father told me that.
Ukrainians right now don't have the logistics capability to support this NATO equipment.
Yeah, Scott, just if you reminded me briefly, obviously it's not the same, but to a lesser extent, you reminded me when the Germans built the Tiger tank in World War II, you had to train the crew very well on this, and then it would still break down. They had a lot of engine problems in the beginning, and then even if you knew what to fix, the replacement parts took so long to build and to deliver. Obviously, it's a revolutionary tank for the time, and a lot of modern tanks look a lot like it, But it's just in a war, in wartime. Building that in mass, I mean, it's really problematic. And of course, the Russians, they're building the T-34s, which are, they're nothing they're nothing compared to the Tiger. But the fact that you have more of them and you're able to build more of them quickly, it's like you said, logistics wins war. Logistics win wars, right? I think that's one example.
It's anecdotal. I have to go back and reread the book. There's a historian, Gantz, I think his name is, and he wrote one of the definitive books about the Battle of Kursk called Battle of Kursk. And I do believe, and I have to recheck it, so anybody watching, don't hold me to this, but I think that the majority of the Tiger tanks that were committed by the Germans in Kursk were abandoned on the battlefield because they broke down, not because the Russians destroyed them.
My God.
And so, this is just the reality of war. When you bring in an overly complex piece of equipment, and you put it up against something like the T-34-85, which is, of course, 1943, the Russians started putting this new model of T-34 out with the better engine, but the 85 millimeter gun upgrade over the 76 millimeter gun, which is now a tank killer. And they're able to maneuver. They're faster. They don't break down. You got them in large numbers, and they just overwhelmed the Germans. The Germans had better tanks, but is it really a better tank if it breaks down? I don't think so.
Right, exactly. And I just want to put up on the screen, just so people can actually see this. This is on the above tab is the it won't let me show the image. I'm trying to find this on Google. Basically, this picture over here, right, the one that I've magnified. The top is the Tiger tank, the German Tiger tank, and underneath it, T-34. It's actually crazy that the Germans managed to put an 88 millimeter gun on a tank. I mean, that's wild. That's usually used for anti-aircraft, and the fact that they put on a tank is crazy. But like you said, is it really better if it keeps breaking down? It's tough to say. I guess not. And I want to go back to
I think his answer is no. It's not better.
I just want to go back to the picture I was showing earlier of what the United States and the UK gave to Ukraine, which is we have on the left side the MLRS, also known as the M27. This is a one firing system, and then the one on the right is the HIMARS, which we were talking about regarding these prisoners of war who were killed in that prison the other day. And the thing is, on the top they've listed all these payloads, but there was a strict rule that the United States would not give the long-range ones to Ukraine for fear that they would, enter Russian territory. So I believe the long-range ones are. You'll have to help me out, Scott. I think
the ATACMS.
Right, there you go. So it's this over here, M39, M39A1. It's this group over here. There we go.
Yeah. Those are the 300-kilometer range systems.
See, this is what I love about having you on, Scott, is that you're not just so proficient with history and analysis, but also you're in the military, so we get to dabble into a little bit of technical, little geek moments here. The ones they gave them are correct me if I'm wrong, it's the M26, M30, M31s, the ones on the left. These are the short range ones.
Correct, and they may have also given them some of the GPS enabled systems for greater accuracy. So,
wow.
But the bottom line is HIMARS is a very capable system. There's no debating that point. But it is a system that requires maintenance, and it also requires, if it's going to survive in the modern battlefield, there has to be extensive intelligence integration of the threat environment with the operational employment plan. And that's something that the Ukrainians simply aren't capable of doing. If the Ukrainians were using HIMARS on their own, all the HIMARS would be destroyed by now because the Russians would have hunted them down and killed them.
Yeah, and I believe they had some Ukrainians being brought to Germany for training, not necessarily on the HIMARS, but in general. Is that correct as well?
No, on HIMARS too. The Grafenvor training facility dates back to Cold War times. The United States used it as their artillery and their tank, primarily their tank maneuver and fire area. Today it's an artillery and tank training range. But the Ukrainians went there to get trained on the M777 initially, and then they were brought there to train on the HIMARS as well. Right. And they were able to get actual live fire training in. They're not taking your basic recruits. I think sometimes people get the impression, because of the one-sided nature of the military victory that Russia's achieving on the battlefield, that the Ukrainians are somehow incompetent. They're not. They're the furthest thing from incompetent. Their active military was very well trained.
Recording in progress.
The United States, we in what was it? Very well trained. The United States. You don't get 61 years old, man, because your brain just literally.
I'm sorry that lady just interrupted us. She was very rude of her.
That's okay. No, but that's what I was gonna say. The U.S. had we had 3 permanent training facilities in Ukraine, where we were training from 2015 on. Every 55 days, we would train a Ukrainian battalion to NATO standards.
Yeah.
And then we bragged about shipping them off to the east so they could kill Russians over there. But the Ukrainians were very well trained, and their artillery, personnel, even though they're using Soviet equipment, they are schooled in the principles of artillery. So when you take some of these Ukrainian forces, and they're taking the best of the best, they take them over to Germany. These are already professional warriors, people who have combat experience. Unlike many of the people training them, they know what it's like to be on the receiving end of Russian artillery fire, and they know what it's like to fire artillery shells at the Russians. And they were getting, I think 30, 60 days worth of training, extensive training on this particular system. Now, normally you'd say, well, 60, that's not enough. But if you already know the basic fundamentals of artillery, you already know about soldiering, you already know about combat. What you're really getting trained in is the technical specifics of the system. operations and basic maintenance. And that's sufficient time. So these Ukrainians that are operating the M777, operating the HIMARS, these are high quality troops, very professional, very proficient, and they deserve the highest amount of respect possible. That doesn't mean that if you're the Russians, you don't kill them. No, these are the guys you want to kill first because they're the most dangerous guys on the battlefield. But I think there's a perception in the West that somehow the Ukrainians are a bunch of bumbling idiots because we see video after video of the conscripts refusing to fight. But let's put it this way: the Ukrainians had 260,000 active duty professional troops on this war zone, and they may have suffered 70,000 losses. Many of those losses are from nationalist units like Azov and territorial units, which are undertrained.
That's more than the UK, just for comparison. The UK doesn't even have that many.
The Russians have killed the equivalent of the British military. But my point is, let's say they were all Ukrainian soldiers, professional soldiers. That still means that the Ukrainians have 190,000 professional troops left. So
there you go.
Let's never forget the fact that there's a lot of well-trained, well-motivated professional Ukrainian warriors out there who are hooking and jabbing with the Russians on a daily basis. So I think I bring that point up just to underscore the fact that the combat that's taking place in Ukraine is real. This ain't fake. This isn't some Call of Duty, Medal of Honor video game. This is real between two professional militaries. And the Ukrainians, if the Russians make a mistake, they'll learn the hard way. The Ukrainians mean business because the Ukrainians will kill the Russians. But here's the other point I wanted to make. The fact that Russia is dominating the battlefield, getting kill ratios of up to 20-1 against this professional force, what's that say about the Russians? And anybody in the West who's sitting there saying, the Russians are nothing, we can beat the Russians, NATO can beat. No, we can't. The Russians are better than we are. The Russians have perfected the art of war in Ukraine. Their combat formations are as finely tuned killing machines as you could ask for. They're not perfect. They make mistakes. They suffer casualties. But normally in combat, when you're going up against two evenly matched forces, you're looking at casualty ratios of 1.2, 1.4 to 1. The United States had that. When we had Operation Cobra or there was Falaise Pocket. We're not talking about gigantic differences in kill ratios. We were losing a lot of guys because the Germans would kill, but we ground them down, outmaneuvered them, and pushed them on. Even the Russians on the Eastern Front, there's a reason why Russia lost 27 million. That's because the Germans were pretty damn good at fighting. And so the Russians, to win these big impressive victories, suffered immense casualties. Well, the Russian army right now in Ukraine is not in the business of suffering immense casualties. This is, they have opted not to go to mobilization. They are fighting this war roughly with the resources they started with. I think there's no doubt that the Russians have suffered losses. From the Russian perspective, we would call these considerable losses. I don't think they're to the degree that the United Kingdom or Ukraine says, but I would not be surprised if Russia has combined with the Russian military together with the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Militia, have suffered in the vicinity of 10,000, 15,000 dead. Wouldn't shock me. And it wouldn't shock me if they've suffered, again, combined somewhere around 30 to 40,000 wounded. So we're looking at 55,000. And that about roughly replicates the number of reinforcements Russia is, some people have said, it's said that Russia has received around 60,000 reinforcements. But the Russian force level remains the same, around 200, 220,000 troops. So they haven't changed their force structure. It's still the same structure that they went in with, which means they aren't. And most of those Russian casualties, I believe, came early on in the conflict. A lot of the Donetsk and Lugansk casualties came from the fighting we're seeing now. I mean, what's going on in the trenches in eastern Ukraine is just brutal, brutal fighting. And the guys carrying the brunt of that action are the Donetsk militia.
Really?
I mean, the world doesn't understand what's happening there. The absolute bloody nature of this conflict, and it's horrible on both sides. But my point is that the Russians aren't in the business of suffering immense casualties. They fine-tuned this battle. That's why the Ukrainians are saying we're getting slaughtered, and we haven't even seen a Russian, because the Russians have
That's
perfected
terrifying.
the art of war so that they minimize their exposure and maximize the Ukrainian exposure. And even saying this, the Ukrainian military is still out there hooking and jabbing because they're professionals.
Yep.
These guys are professionals. They're good at what they do. They're amazing at what they do, actually. To be honest, it's tough to say that if you're somebody who is on the Russian side, but professionals have to recognize professionalism.
Yeah.
During the Vietnam War, I think everybody I've talked to who fought in that conflict were very, very respectful of the skill, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, recognizing that they were going up against some high-class troops. But the thing that amazed the Americans the most was the organizational professionalism of the North Vietnamese when it came to logistically supplying their forces in the field. The Ho Chi Minh Trail,
Right.
the bombing, and yet they still were able to get the material through. The Ukrainians are being subjected to unprecedented targeting by the Russians in terms of taking down logistics and things of that nature. The Russians are showing every day, videotapes of warehouses being blown up. And each time they hit a warehouse, a lot of equipment's being destroyed. And yet the Ukrainians are still fighting, which means they are adapting, that they have come up with, new ways to support their troops that are succeeding getting equipment to the front lines. A lot of people, myself included, didn't think the Ukrainians would be able to sustain this sort of logistic support. Sure, they're getting a lot of help from the West, but you know what? There's a difference between a guy like me sitting on his butt in an air-conditioned office, 100 miles removed, communicating over a computer what I think is good, which is Western support, and the actual Ukrainian soldier on the ground, sweating, thirsty, hungry, bleeding, his eardrums punctured from explosions, and he's the one doing the job. I won't use the term, but he has big something, okay? And we have to give them credit where credit is due, which is why I think people need to respect what the Russians are accomplishing, because the Russians are, I don't mean to be disrespectful to NATO, but there's not a single NATO military force that could have stood up against the Ukrainian military and beat them. Wow. If the Ukrainians had gone to war against Poland, they would have wiped Poland off the map. If the Ukrainian military had gone to war against Germany, the same thing. The same thing against Romania, the same thing against France. The Ukrainians were that tough and that good. And yet they're losing to Russia, which should be the biggest message out of this for all of NATO. That, when John Stoltenberg opens his mouth and talks about creating a 300,000-man rapid response force, somebody needs to just tell him to sit down and shut up, because that's not the solution.